Welcome to the Sales Leaders Operating System, the podcast for sales leaders who know that success starts with strong leadership. Whether it's your first time leading a team or you're a seasoned pro, we've got the real-world advice you need to lead your team to greatness. Now, here's your host, Matt McDarby.
Hello and welcome to the Sales Leaders Operating System, the podcast for sales leaders, built by sales leaders. This is Matt McDarby. I'm your host and author, coach, and advisor to elite sales leaders all over the world. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we have an outstanding guest. Let me introduce you to them now. My next guest started her software sales career at IBM Software Group as a pre-sales consultant. She then sold for Lombardi Software, was later acquired by IBM again, and then went on to Pegasystems. That's where we met. We met when Jillian was enrolled in a high potential sales leaders development program where she proved herself worthy of that title, high potential leader. And she has since risen up in responsibility and impact and is now head of specialist sales at Pegasystems. Please welcome Jillian Irizarry. Jillian, welcome to the Sales Leaders Operating System.
Wow, Matt, thank you for that background and that intro. It's been some time. Good to see you.
Well, I mean, look, you can thank me, but you're the one who has done all the things and accomplished all the stuff, right, that makes the bio interesting. So now I'm thrilled to have you with me. You know, it was almost 7 years ago that we worked together in that program, right?
It's been that long, has it?
When Leon Treffler himself identified you as one of the dozen people that would participate in this program, and I think he made a great call.
Well, I am grateful for his sponsorship, and I remember what an influence you had, not just on me personally, but also Pega. Your whole concept on the rhythm of business and cadences that still lives today.
Cool, I appreciate that. So it was a lot of fun, and now we get to talk about all of the lessons you've learned since then as you've increased in responsibility, like I said, responsibility and impact on the business. So if it's okay, my task is to try to pull all of these things that you've learned over you're nearly 14 years at Pega plus a few years before that. So you're coming up almost on 20 years, not to age you, 20 years in software sales, right? So a lot we can learn from you.
You know, we're close. If you spend 15 years at Pega, you're awarded with a bobblehead. So I'm just a few short months away from that esteemed gift.
Wow. I've never heard that before. That's amazing. So you'll have to come back
to the new headquarters. Yep.
And so at least send me a picture of your bobblehead. All right. So my job is to pull as much as we can out of your brain in the 25-ish, 30 minutes that we have. So if it's okay, I'm just going to dive in and ask you some questions and we'll see where it takes us. Okay?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. All right. So as listeners to the show will know, and as I've previewed for you, that one of the themes of this show is systems thinking, right, as it applies to leading a sales team or a whole sales organization. Why? Because the best sales leaders that I know and that I've observed or worked with have a system or a way of sort of making sense of a pretty complex environment, right, to diagnose and adjust performance, move certain levers to get better results. Now, as I said earlier, you've been a very successful sales leader over time. And I'd love to hear from you, like, what are the most important parts of your system? What can you share with us?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matt. As I was thinking of this conversation, I thought about the different types of sales that I've been a part of, right? And in some businesses, it was part of a more transactional sale, if you will. And some of the businesses, my most recent especially, it's much more of a value, transformative, consultative type sale. And so a little bit different of a technique where perhaps you are doing much more research up front and then you're testing your hypotheses, you're trying to pivot and teach. But when I took a step back and I really thought of the kind of macro picture, and back to your comment on systems thinking, I think it's really about first, what is your purpose of the engagement? So really trying to think of the outcome in mind first, explain why you're even having this conversation or the sale or what you're trying to drive. So purpose is that first step. And then picture what that future will look like. So if you know much about the 4 Ps framework, it's very much from that, where you think of the purpose, you picture what the future is going to look like, and then you think of the plan, outlining the steps you need to achieve that desired future, and then describe the role of the person or the parts that are going to help you really drive that to completion. So I thought, those 4 Ps framework is really helping, whether it was a transactional sale or more of a consultative type sale, I think can really pretty much summarize how I approach each of the engagements. It's almost like thinking of the end in mind, almost like write that headline that you want to achieve at the end and then work behind that.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I grew up, I mean, I shouldn't say grew up, but most of my selling career has been in more complex sales, right? Value oriented selling. So that definitely resonates. And I understand what you mean. Talk to me about how that translates for a team, right? How do you get a team, if that's the system and it makes good sense?
Right.
And there are a lot of systems that make good sense and teams hear them. They're like, yeah, but I'm not doing it that way, right? So I'm going to do it my own way, or I'm not going to listen to your system. So how do you get a team to adopt this, whether it's 4 Ps or a system that's like it, starting with the outcomes in mind? Like, what have you learned about getting a team to, kind of think and act that way?
Sure. Well, I think it's first about really meeting your team where they are. And I like to think that the system is really nothing more than a guiding principle. It really, outlines what the behaviors are. And some people really enjoy that kind of North Star. Others perhaps already have that embedded inside them internally. And maybe it just seems a little bit more, you want to make sure you're not over engineering and being too of a micromanager. So I'd say first it's knowing where your teams are as individuals. Are some of them much more framework oriented, or some much more laid back, or some much more relational? And being able to adjust that guiding principle or that framework to fit their personal needs. Reminds me of a story. I was actually working with a teammate of mine who has a very large scale account to try to crack into, and feels like they couldn't find the right people in the account to engage with. And you take a look at that, and it's not that they couldn't find the right people. They didn't know how to get to the right people. The kind of tactics they were using, whether it was an outbound email, weren't really quite working. So we decided to pivot and try something a little bit more on the social nudging through LinkedIn, or trying just a different tactic. So that first objection really wasn't the issue. It was the tactics that we were using couldn't get to the right person. So again, I think it's just about meeting your teammates where they are, and we're looking at the system or framework just as a guiding light.
The first thing you said was adjust the framework, or words to the effect of adjust the framework to fit their needs. But that example, that story you just told also is, well, you have to diagnose how they interpret the framework to know, like, is it the how they need help with? Have they done it before? They just, right? That's why I took what you were saying.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think a little bit about some of the current work. We have so many great new tools at our fingertips these days. And I do think that organizations try really hard to provide these tools as helpful enhancements to sellers. But the reality is that change management, to actually adopt what that tool is, get your fingers, trying it out, whether it's talking with AI, trying to advance your account research, help you drive new contacts and list creation. It's such an incredible time to be a seller, but it takes some time to really help adopt those tools and those techniques. So you're right. I think it's about diagnosing and not just throwing the support over the fence and hoping somebody picks it up and can run with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great lesson. Now, if people listening don't know much about Pega, then the detail I would fill in here is that when you say, like, you guys are really like at the tip of the spear, the bleeding edge, generative AI, using generative AI in a way that companies it will take them years to catch up and understand how you guys are using it, right? And so when you say learning and adjusting, it's like you got a fairly complex environment. It's not just like, hey, there's some tool that we're tinkering with. We ask people to get smart on how to use Copilot or something like that. It's much more advanced and complex than that, right?
Oh, I am such a fan of Pega's technology and how we're solving actual client problems. But think about it from the buyer perspective. What a complex world it is to be a buyer when a lot of these vendors are saying the same thing. So what I really try to infuse in my teams is to believe in the product, get out there and learn. We have a great, online technology course itself, but get out there and do experiential learning alongside your clients. So, not necessarily trying to do a plug for all of Pega's products right now, but we have this really cool capability called Blueprint, where you're actually sitting side by side with your clients and walking through a generative AI application development, or, how do you simulate a next best action environment for customer engagement? That's the kind of gap that I'm talking about, Matt, when it comes to coaching teams, is getting them from behind the wall or behind the screen and actually do experiential learning and it's okay to mess up a little bit, just as long as you're practicing and you're getting out there and asking for help along the way.
Yeah. You have to. You have to be willing to get out and try and fail and learn, right? And
Yeah, you have to, but some of these teams perhaps haven't built that into their culture. And so that's something I'm really passionate about.
well, we started by talking about what are the key elements of your system, and then we got one big lesson learned here is you really have to meet your team where they are, which is like diagnosing down to the individual team member. How do they interpret these frameworks? How are they learning and practicing? How do I help them get better at doing this? And again, I'll just say it one last time about Pega's environment. Jillian has figured out how to do, and other leaders have too. They're obviously a very successful organization, but Jillian has figured this out in what is technologically a fairly advanced and complex environment. It is possible to do what she's saying in an environment like that. So if you're listening and thinking, yeah, but there's so much complexity and everything's changing because of generative AI, I'm like, well, yeah, but people are doing it. So are there any other really important lessons that you've learned so far about, I'm really focused on leading, right? Leading a sales team, leading a team in general. Anything else you would share with us there?
Sure. I think my favorite part about you just use that word, diagnosing and helping really champion the individual. I think the thing that I love the most is when that aha moment happens with a teammate.
Mm.
And for example, you get from behind following the checklist or the playbook or the template or the guiding, whatever you want to call that system, when they move from following that and using it to create their own.
Mm.
And, when you're in the enterprise software, sales market, you're right, it is complex. You need the combination of highly relational believability. You need the technical chops and the proof points, and you really need to orchestrate this end to end. Sometimes it's 12, sometimes it's a 24-month sales cycle. So you've got to have endurance. And so I think it's that aha moment when all of those checklists, the supporting materials, and the taking time to diagnose where that individual needs extra support, when all of a sudden they feel that they can be innovative in their problem solving and move to that more of the solutioning with the teams. The firms that I've worked with that you mentioned, they're not small firms or medium-sized, large-sized firms. You have a lot of supporting people that want to jump in and help, but it takes somebody who knows how to ask for the right help to help accelerate that deal cycle, which is really exciting for me.
Yeah. Okay. That's an important, right? It's not just the aha moment. It's when you see somebody has learned something well enough to be able to apply it in their own way and innovate and stretch it and improve it, right?
That's right. That's right. And I think so often as a leader, you get excited when you're able to solve that problem, perhaps with a teammate, but how powerful is it when you can share that best practice and then, create that programmatic effect to support others in the team, which is really exciting.
Yeah. We've already talked openly about challenging, complex, right? And anybody listening is going to say, yeah, well, I have my own version of challenging and complex, right? Every day I'm dealing with people issues and new things we have to learn in our selling environment. And I'm curious about what have you found? You've overcome a lot of barriers to be successful. What have you found to be the most challenging part of leading a team, and what have you done about it?
I think maybe a little bit of what I mentioned earlier is something that I'm feeling now with such an opportunity to leverage all these great tools that are out there. Perhaps it's about breaking some of the good habits I've adopted over the years so that I can transform into this net new world, right? We've got these concepts of, fanatical prospecting and setting up golden hours and reaching, prospective customers and engaging people, but what if there were better ways to reach these individuals? What if there were better ways to enrich your research using AI? I don't know if you've seen Notebook LM. That's a very cool technology to create podcasts. There are just so many new things out there, Matt, that I would say probably the biggest challenge is recasting that vision I have for myself as a leader, recasting what good engagement could look like. And what we're doing about that is, number one, getting some external input, taking some opinions. I think I just read a quote recently about, you can never predict the future, but you can triangulate with some well-respected folks to make sure that you're at least synthesizing a potential future that you're prepared to handle. And so maybe triangulating some external resources, seeing how they're using it, and then coming back internally and figuring out how to adopt those best and creating a program out of it. But it's breaking some of those good habits I find the most challenging.
Yeah, that's the thing. I when he first said, I was like, wait, did you say breaking bad habits? He said, no, breaking good habits. Because breaking bad habits, we all want to do that. And that's sort of cliche at this point, and it's universal. But breaking good habits is much harder, right? I did things this way and I got great results. I actually have to move on from those habits to be able to accomplish what I need to now. When did you conclude that was the thing you needed to do or that you needed to help your people to do to kind of continue succeeding? Like, what was the moment?
Yeah, very specifically, I think it was some recent training I did on social selling. So, as you've mentioned, I've done about, I'll say, almost 2 decades here in this current firm and have been successful at building relationships, converting deals, ensuring client success. If I look back and I did an honest assessment of what got me there, it really is through that personalized, relationship building, which probably could have scaled a lot more. And I think the social selling class that we took, again, leveraging a lot of skills on LinkedIn and LinkedIn Sales Navigator, it's really taught me ways on how you can reach potential buyers through tagging articles, referencing them, building a better cohort. I don't think I've really taken to that from a professional standpoint as much as I could and as I should.
Look, sometimes the best thing that training can do for us is raise our awareness to something we're not doing as effectively as we could. Whether the actual methods that we're taught are exactly the perfect ones for us or not is immaterial. It's, do we recognize something about our capability that we didn't recognize before, right? Are we seeing something different?
When also that's right. And I think, in that same vein of systems thinking, understanding how the system, in this case, LinkedIn, actually works and how their algorithm works. And, things that I thought were effective before, like sharing posts and, doing some thumbs up, that's actually not as valuable as, tagging the potential prospective buyer, driving some warm introductions and really expanding the eyes, if you will, for the target customers that you want to get better branding. Look, everybody wants improved marketing, getting their brand voice out there, whether the firm or their personal. And that's a great space for me to lean into.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And a good example, right? Because anyone listening here, might have had a recent experience or might be looking out ahead at something that they want to learn. And they're like, I have a sense this is really important for me. So maybe the thing we can all take away from that example is we all have some good habit that we need to break in favor of a better one, right?
That's it. Maybe we'll come back here, let's say 30, 60 days, and I'll give you an update on, on how it's working out. But I've already seen my, I guess you call it your SSI, your social selling index. Yeah, they also have their SSI, and I'm tracking that pretty closely.
Yeah. Neat. Okay, good. Sales management can be the most difficult and thankless job if you don't manage your time and your team effectively. I'm Matt McDarby, and my proven Cadence Tuning Framework, or CT Scan for short, has transformed sales leaders at hundreds of companies, including ADP, Equitable, McGraw-Hill, and Medtronic. Get the CT Scan free at salesmanagers.news. All right, well, look, you've thrown yourself fully into this role and all of your other ones up to this point, and usually that means there's something about it that you love. Other than the success and the recognition, what do you love most about leading a sales team?
What do I love most about leading a sales team? I think it's the authentic relationships you can build out of. Usually the salesperson profile, Matt, are those that are just hungry to engage, prove that you can help solve a customer's problem. And it's building some of those authentic customer and team relationships, that kind of trifecta that I love the most. You get into a room and you've got your technology teams, your selling teams, your customers. You get that perfect mix, people in the room. I don't know how to describe that. There's probably a word that can describe that when everything's really hitting on all cylinders. That's what keeps me
There's
driven.
probably a Venn diagram we could be drawing right now if it was accompanying the, this conversation.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
The convergence of relationships with these people. No, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that so fulfilling? Out of curiosity, like what is it about that? Because I hear versions of that from other leaders, but I'm curious for you, like why is that the thing that you'd say you love the most?
Sure. I think maybe when I was younger, I grew up in a very loving home. at my mom's house in a very loving home. At my dad's house, I split when I was young, and they couldn't have been any different, Matt. Growing up in my mom's house, much more social. I had a lot of, activities and events with friends. My dad's house was a little bit more specific around academics and are you healthy? Are you fine? But kind of growing up in that environment and realizing, having empathy for two different types of personalities, figuring out how to communicate well, how to, drive forward and have my own, successes in my day and then come back and survive in that environment just made me have empathy for the different opinions and points of view that people have even in their work life. So being able to kind of cross that chasm, if you will, between different people in a room to come together for a desired outcome, I just think that's something innately that I love to do.
Yeah, neat. I didn't know that about you and your background,
No.
but I do see how that would, like, being exposed and recognizing those differences, but having, two good environments, how that would inform who you are today makes a lot of sense. Now that you say it.
They were very different environments. And I guess I could bring that to the work world. You could sit there with teams who have all the best intentions, but they're just not communicating well,
Sure.
or they're missing the kind of the big why or the big point.
Sure.
And I think that's in my personality profile somewhere where I just kind of come back to the big picture thinking
Yeah.
and try to bring all the cognitive diversity together.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like
That
it.
feels good when it's all realized.
Yep. Yep. I understand. Okay, good. No, that's a great way of describing it. I'm glad I asked that question because it gives me a little insight into Jillian, but also, look, a lot of us come from similar situations. I think the thing that I find is most of the leaders that I interview, if I get to ask them where'd you learn that kind of question, or where'd that come from? A lot of them go back to experiences very early in their lives as children, teens, first job, formative years, right? Where something they picked up, they're like, oh, well, that actually felt pretty good. Or this is the thing that makes me feel like I'm making an impact, right?
We got away from looking at that, I feel like, as maybe as just an industry. But at the end of the day, last thing I checked, we're still driven by humans as a sales team, supported by AI. But I think it's important to have that personal identity attached to it. We used to do the predictive index. Is that something that you've done within your companies?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was just recently brought up again, just to really figure out what makes you tick.
Right.
What if you could do that with every customer that you were engaged with?
Yeah.
What a world it would be in. Or just add that on your profile or your,
Yeah. Well, look, I know there have been attempts at companies that say they can profile a buyer so that you can be more effective at selling to them. And I was sort of dubious about that because they tended to be very narrow in the areas that they profiled. And again, like I said, I kind of been in the complex major account, that world for a long time. And there's so many factors that influence how people go about making decisions. I never found those kind of more basic profiling tools to be all that helpful because you just never know in the moment where somebody really is, like what their motivations are, what the boundaries are, what they're assessing, who they're assessing, any of it. Interesting data points mainly, but yeah.
It's all contextual.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. I've got a couple more questions here. I'm curious. Now, you just mentioned your parents and the environment that you grew up in and kind of what you learned about how to build relationships in two pretty different but parallel environments. Aside from mom and dad, who would you say has had the most influence on you and your work as a leader?
I've had incredible mentors and previous managers. Perhaps I won't name any one of them specifically on this call because I would hate to show favoritism, but a couple quotes from them that always stuck to me is, always look out for your team. And so when I've had management that's looked out for me, it's provided me the opportunity as a leader to remember and respect what it felt like to be looked after. And then it's kind of influenced me in how I look after my team themselves. But then I think also to pull another kind of family story, I'd say my grandfather, he was a painter in Florida, and he used to do portraits and caricatures, and he built a small business before they even allowed cameras into courtrooms. He would kind of go into the courtrooms and do sketches, and then eventually owned his own framing shop. But for him, he never worked in sales necessarily, but he taught me that success leaves clues everywhere, and he'd always remember everyone's name. He knew business was personal.
Yeah.
And so I think a combination of the professional management that I've had that really told me it's about the teams and the people you work with, combined with, just observing my grandfather who knew it was all about personal relationships. It was a good inspiration.
Yeah. You said something. Explain. You said success leaves clues. Explain.
Yeah, success leaves clues. I think it's about knowing people's names, knowing active listening, perhaps, is the better way to say that.
No, I like success leaves clues. That's why I'm asking. I like the way, I like how that
Yeah.
sounds.
Yeah, success leaves clues. It was more the active listening, I think, part of it,
Okay.
where knowing somebody's name, that they went on a trip recently, what happened, last week at the kids' ball game. Those little tiny stories, Matt,
Yeah.
those matter. The human connection, I think, is more important than we have put emphasis.
Oh, yeah. No, we underemphasize it, I think. All right. Does that come naturally to you, or is that something you have to really work at?
It comes naturally for me. I will put a caveat here that I need to get better at my calendar management, because when there are so many things going on
Mm,
and you have half-hour blocks of time, it does become easy to jump into a half-hour time block, and you don't ask "Hey Matt, how you doing?
yeah.
How are things going?" That all of a sudden your full day is blocked back to back and you're talking to a lot of people. But are you listening? Are you engaging? Or is it more transactional? So it comes naturally, but B, I've noticed that perhaps in my work world, I need better time management to get those deeper relationships going.
Yeah. I'm envious of you and others for whom that comes naturally, because for me, my natural tendency is like, I'm all business. I'm like, boom, 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 boom. Like, like we got things we got to get done.
Really? I couldn't tell that.
Well, I mean, so everything that I do now, listening, learning, understanding, it's a learned skill.
I've noticed you taking a lot of notes here. Is
I
that
am. Yeah. I have, yes. And I refer back
Yeah.
to my notes, and I've got a system around my notes, because I get, the worst feeling in the world that I have is, so I know I've met someone and I cannot come up with their name.
What do you do in that scenario?
I break out in a sweat and sometimes leave the room. No, but
Just say, nice to see you again.
so
it's
wonderful.
nice to see you again. Yeah.
Yes. So wonderful to see you again. How is the family? Praying to heaven that they have one.
I do have a little bit of a habit where I'll always reintroduce myself. Hi, I'm Jillian. Good to see you. Just in case it sparks some opportunity for them to reintroduce themselves.
Yes, that's a very nice way of doing it. And sometimes I just have to fall on my story. Look, I know we've met. I've got a horrible memory for people's names. Please don't be offended. Allow me to reintroduce myself. So maybe I'm taking a partial page from your book, but I'm going to fall on my sword first. Okay. All right, good. All right, love that. And your grandpa, like, that's a great example. I am going to repeat success leaves clues, but I've got to explain to people. It's like, hey, here's how I interpreted that. There are things that you need to be listening for. You must pay attention to that matter to people, that will probably lead to a strong relationship, which is going to create success at some point. That's how I interpret that. Is that what you meant?
That's right. And yes, and it is. And if you think about, I don't know, consider in a selling environment, CRM software or relationship mapping, isn't that kind of what that means? You kind of circle the names. Are they in favor of your tech? Are they a detractor? I think it's listening to those clues, understanding the context from which that person is coming from. And that's what it really, really reminds me of.
My friends at Ignite Selling, they talk about advocates and adversaries, like thinking about people in the organization. It's right. It's the same, similar idea. And they map them out. It's kind of a cool way to do it. But all right, enough of that. Last question. In the last few minutes that we have, I ask a big, open, and purposely vague question to see what else we can grab out of your brain. What else? What else, Jillian? What else can you share with us? What else can we learn from you?
I think this theme, thank you again for inviting me to this podcast. And it had me dig into this theme of, areas of improvement and challenges and things I've learned. But really, it's just how exciting, what a profound opportunity to have the reshaping of the selling landscape with AI. And it's not just around some of the tools that I'm mentioning here, Matt, to drive efficiency and effectiveness on research and organizational strategy and planning. But I think it's also about sharpening our value as sellers into the reshaping of the why and the how. You almost become purpose architects as a human in this world, right? You get the opportunity to drive so much information at your fingertips. That used to take a lot of sellers a lot of time to find. So I think that's kind of the last thing that was in my mind and thinking through this, and maybe, part of the evolution of self is really just trying to figure out how I can reinvent my own skill set,
Mhm.
but really just taking a look at this space and how it's going to really reshape the selling environment.
Yeah. I like how you put it. We've got a couple of things here, Jillian. Before this gets published, I think you have to slap a TM after success leaves clues and a TM after purpose architects, unless somebody else has already said that. But I look, sharpening our value and always sort of thinking about how do I need to sharpen. I have a few years on you, you know this. I also every day I'm thinking about, and I not worried about it, but I focus on, am I getting any better? Am I any better at what I do today than I was a year or so ago? And if the answer to that in any particular area is I'm not sure or no, I get like really, I'm pissed, because I'm like, I've got to be getting better, because in the end, every hour I spend doing this work, I'm away from the family. I'm not doing things that ultimately are my real purpose here, right? So I'm like, well, shoot, if I'm going to invest the time into this professional endeavor, I got to be getting better at it. I can be guilty maybe being a little too introspective on those things sometimes, but what you said resonates. Like, how do we do a better job of helping other people to achieve their why, their purpose, achieve the outcomes that they want? Quick anecdote here, and I'll say it quickly, then get your last bit. That it's pretty common. I still sell. Pretty common that my first question when I talk to a prospective customer, I ask them, what are you trying to achieve? What's the business outcome you want? Just give me a little bit of background on there. And if I get what do you mean? Or the answer is like they go straight to a tool or a solution, I already know, okay, I'm going to struggle with this buyer a little bit because they're not actually thinking about what they're trying to achieve. So I'm not exactly sure what I can do for them, honestly. So whereas other people might be like, okay, that's fine. Let's just get to the solution. We'll kind of get down to brass tacks. That's a real struggle for me. So I've got to figure out a way how to sharpen my value is to help people find a way to answer that question when they struggle to answer it right up front. So, which is a huge barrier potentially. Go ahead. You were going to say something.
That's an interesting insight. And you just reminded me, I think, where I pulled one of those concepts from is a book that I'm reading. It's called The Next Level. But there's this concept of a personal GPS. And I was just trying to find the information about it. But it's about, living your life at your best personally in your community. So you have a capacity to renew your energy and gain some perspective, and then making sure you're bringing that back into the work. So I think there is something there about balance that you just reminded me of, and having that personal GPS. But I'll send you that link for that book.
Yeah.
That's what reminded me of that.
Yeah. Love to see it. Wonderful. Well, look, Jillian, like I said, I've got to pull as much out of your brain in 30 minutes or so. I've done that. I know we could go another 3 or 4 hours. I will have you back one way or another if you're open to the idea.
Very much so.
Yeah. In the meantime, so I'm going to peel off now and summarize for the audience a few of the big ideas we heard from you and challenge them to think about how they can apply them to their world. It won't be difficult because a lot of what you shared should resonate with this audience. In the meantime, thank you so much. I know you're busy, for giving up the time. I so appreciate it. It was wonderful to have you on the show.
It was an honor. Thank you for the invitation.
I knew Jillian would have a lot of great insights to share with us. Let me just break down a few and then challenge you to think about how do you make them apply to your environment. She's really worked at her craft as a leader and as a seller over the years. When we talked about her system, she made reference to the 4 Ps. We talked a little bit about the Next Level book and her 4 Ps: purpose, picture what the future looks like, plan, and people. Right, that resonates with me because I think you have to be thinking about, from the start, what are we trying to achieve? What's the outcome we're going for, both as an organization, but also as individuals? Have a clear vision of what the future looks like when we get there. Have a way of not just assembling a plan, but communicating the plan. And ultimately make sure that you have the right people. So these are elements we've heard from other successful leaders. So I'm just playing them back quickly because you should hear these themes because they play out over and over and over again. When we talked about leading, Jillian made a really important point. She said, you have to meet your team where they are, adjust the framework to fit their needs, right? These are humans that have development needs. They come from different places, have different strengths, different perspectives. rather than just lay a one-size-fits-all sort of framework for success upon them and kind of sit back and wait for good things to happen. We really have to diagnose how these people interpret the framework. That should tell you you've got to have dialogue. You've got to have conversation with them about the framework for success in your organization, right? So we can't simply lay a plan and a framework for success down for a team. We have to engage and meet them where they are. How do we do that? By understanding where they are. Jillian's learned some really important lessons from a past manager. Always look out for your team. I know she's been a great advocate for people on her team over the years. That's why she's so well loved by the people that work for her. When we talked about a challenge, she said something that we have not heard before. These words have not come from anyone else. And she said, sometimes we have to break good habits. We're so accustomed to hearing about breaking bad habits, developing new ones. But in order to change, and to her point, to get better at what we do, sometimes we have to break good habits. How do we do that? Well, certainly we can get training, right? But ultimately, it's get some outside perspective. Have someone observe who doesn't have a particular stake in you continuing to do your work the way you've been doing it, but who's willing to give you some straight up feedback based on their observations. In order for you to be better at X, you have to set aside Y, right? Something you've done in the past. I think that's brilliant. So my challenge to you is, if you're thinking about members of your team or even an individual on your team, maybe she or he is a top performer, but you see a future where they could be performing at a higher level, they could be making a bigger impact on their customers, on themselves, on their own families. Maybe you have to be the one to help them break good habits. How will you do that? So there's a challenge I'd love for you to take up. In our next episode, I'm going to talk with a longtime colleague and friend of mine. He's got a ton of insight. He is a veteran of the sales performance industry. He's got a new gig. We're going to talk about his new role at Mind Gym. Very exciting. And we are coming up on the end of our season. We've only got another couple of episodes to come. So please do join us for that next conversation. In the meantime, I'm Matt McDarby, host of the Sales Leaders Operating System podcast. Thank you so much for joining. Bye-bye for now.